Welcome to So Very Easy. My name is Laura, and I have found a fun, irregular, whimsical, free quilt pattern. I do hope you enjoy it. The fabric is from Ben Artex, and it is called First Frost, and this is a pattern designed by Amanda Murphy. There is a free pattern with this fabric line, and it is a very unusual pattern. It has a very unique border on the top and the bottom, which are going to be a lot of fun to do. And then some crazy boxes and flowers. I like to make my flowers first, and that way they're done and out of the way. I will need a total of 8 of these flowers. There are a lot of different fusible webs on the market. I like one that is a lightweight because I'm just going to put these together until I stitch around them. So it sort of stabilizes the fabric as I'm stitching. We have the paper on the one side, the glue on the other. So I'm going to take that shape and draw it out on the paper, cut the shape out, leaving a little bit around the outside, and then fuse that on. And be sure to follow the directions that come with this fusible web. Once I have drawn this shape out and I have fused it on, I now can cut around. By leaving a little bit, it's just going to make sure that the glue has come to the full edge, and it's just a lot easier to do. Now I can cut around that shape. So for each flower, I have the 2 flower pieces in that center. We're going to fuse these layers together. So I do like to only fuse the outside area, and that just saves the bulk building up. So I have the outside shape roughly cut with that inside for both of those flower shapes. I can now take this to the iron, leave that paper on, take the paper off of that center flower part, and go gentle around those curves. Place that flower top on top of the large one, line it up, and before I fuse this together, I'm going to do the centerpiece. Once that paper is gone, I'm going to be able to put my centerpiece on. This gives me a chance to line it up right at the iron, and now I can fuse these 3 pieces together. I still have the paper on the back, so I have no worries about this sticking to the ironing surface or to ruin my iron. So I can fuse these 3 together. Once they're fused together, I'm going to stitch around the center and around that center flower. I use a little blanket stitch so that it's easy to turn the corners, and I've matched my blue and I've matched that red, still leaving the paper on. Now that I have these 8 flowers done, I'm going to be able to start and put the quilt together. And these will be ready when I need them. The first thing we're going to put together are these 2 top and bottom borders. I will be making 2 strip sets. The background fabric is 2 inches, and that's cut the width of the fabric. And this beautiful red is a 4-inch strip, the width of the fabric. So I'm going to sew these 2 together to make 2 strip sets. Press the seams to the darker fabric and then cut these apart into 2.5-inch segments. We will need a total of 24 of these from those 2 strips. Once the 24 are cut out, we're going to be able to match them up with fabric A. These are also 2.5 inches by 5.5 inches. We're going to sew these together. So we're going to have a long strip. And that strip is going to start and end with the secondary fabric. And that is going to make this top and bottom border. I now have those 2 borders done, and I've pressed the seams so they're all going away from the white. And put those borders aside. These small square blocks we get to make next, and they're going to start with 5-inch squares. I have a mixture of 10 different fabrics to make these 5-inch squares. We do need this white sashing in between. The sashing is 1.5 inches by 5 inches to match those block sizes. We can sew them together in sets of 2. And we will need to make 19 of these units, and the fabrics are going to be random. When the 2 units are put together, we're going to take these 2 units and turn them into 6 units that have 4 blocks and 2 units that have 6 blocks. We'll be able to put them together with these little strips that are 1.5 inches by 10.5 inches. When all of these units are put together, we're going to have 1 unit of 2 left over. These block pieces are going to get matched up with these long pieces. They're 8.5 inches by 14 inches. So we need to trim these pieced blocks to fit that 8.5 inches. If you have an 8.5 inch ruler, this is a great time to use it. We just want to lay the ruler down and to skew it a bit. So we are going to make these wonky blocks. I have the 8.5 inches, which will match the 8.5 inch end. And I'm going to trim both sides. All of these piece blocks are going to be trimmed the same way. So when we're looking at this 6 block unit, I'm going to put that ruler down so it's not straight and trim off those 2 edges. So I have that 8.5 inch measurement. We will need to do that even with this block that has the 2 pieces. Once the wonky blocks have been trimmed, we will need to sew them together in a long row. So we can start and do 1 row at a time. I need to sew these 2 pieces together and have this go on an angle. I already have the angle from this pieced block, but this is cut straight, so I need to adjust this large piece. Use the lines on your mat and line up those 2 pieces. I have the 8.5 inches and the 8.5 inches. Place this little sashing piece right in between the 2 pieces and keep them lined up. We're going to use this piece as a template. Place your ruler using the guide of this sashing piece and cut right along each side. So you're going to cut along the top and you're going to cut along the bottom. Without moving the fabric, trim off the 2 sides. So you're making everything equal and using that little strip of fabric. No measurement is needed. Just trim as that strip is telling you to. Peek inside and remove the bottom 2 pieces. Now those pieces are going to match together, and we're going to be able to sew them with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. When we match up those seams, it's important that we leave a little dog ear. That dog ear is going to keep everything lined up. We're going to be able to use the mat and see that 1/4 inch. So the dog ear is going to stick out a 1/4 inch, which is our seam allowance. And we're going to stitch right along, starting at that point. And we're going to stitch all the way down from one side to the other. With that little dog ear, when you fold that fabric back, the sides are going to line up, so there'll be no trimming required. It will be nice and straight. Now we can sew the second side on, doing the same thing. Line up the raw edges and leaving that little 1/4 inch using the guide from your cutting mat. So there was no measuring needed. We just used that piece of fabric and it all squares up. Following the guide is always helpful, and do 1 row at a time because each angle is going to be unique. When all of the plain blocks and the pieced blocks are put together, we're going to have 4 long columns. The columns are going to vary in size, all with that 8.5 inch width. We need to trim each column down to 48.5 inches. And this is where we can do some fun and change where we want them to be. There will be sashing strips that are going to go in between. The sashing strips are 3.5 inches by that 48.5 inches. So we need to cut each 4 of these columns to that 48.5 inch. Sew them together with these 3 strips of sashing in between. When these 4 columns have been put together with that wide sashing, We have 2 side borders and top and bottom. The 2 side borders are cut 5 inches by 48.5 inches. And then we have the top and the bottom 5 inches by 50.5 inches. And once those sides, top and bottom are on, we're going to be able to add that really fun border that we made right at the beginning. The borders are on and all of the center is done. We now get to put on our daisies. I do have that fusible web just around the outside. Take that thin layer off, place these wherever I'd like, and fuse them down. I can then continue that stitch that I used to stitch these pieces down and stitch the outside down. So put your flowers on and stitch them down, and the quilt top is going to be done. This quilt is definitely a very whimsical quilt. I love all the irregular shapes, the fun fabric, and the pop of the flowers. I'll put a link in the description to the fabric line and to the free pattern. And thank you for joining me today on Sew Very Easy. Feel free to subscribe, and as always, come on back. Let's see what we're sewing next time in the sewing room. Bye for now.